On my son's 34th birthday, I stood in the center of my own living room, holding a cake I had baked with trembling hands, chocolate frosting melting slightly under the glow of 34 candles. The house smelled of smoke, and cheap beer music thumped too loudly against the walls I had painted myself 20 years ago, and laughter spilled from the mouths of people I barely knew. They were his friends, not mine. I wanted to believe this celebration would be a turning point, that maybe Darius would see how much I had sacrificed to raise him, to keep a roof over his head, to give him more than I ever had growing up. At 66 years old, my knees ached, and my heart often raced at night, but I carried that cake as if it were hope itself. When I set it down on the coffee table, I smiled, waiting for him to meet my eyes. Instead, he leaned back on the couch, surrounded by his crew, and smirked. He raised his plastic cup of liquor, and in front of everyone, said words that cut deeper than any knife I'd ever felt. "I don't want a gift, Mom. I just want you to disappear." For a moment, silence fell. Even the speakers seemed to stutter. My ears rang, and I thought surely Chi had misheard. But then his friends erupted into cruel laughter, slapping their thighs, pointing at me as though I were the punchline. One of them pulled out his phone recording, making sure my humiliation would live on past this night. My chest tightened so violently, I pressed a hand against it, the cake knife still clutched in my other hand, frosting smearing on my palm. Disappear. That was his birthday wish. Not success, not health, not even a car or money, just that his own mother vanish. I saw the watch in the box beside the cake, a gift I had saved for months to restore the only keepsake left from his late father. I had hoped it might remind him of who we were, of the family we used to be. My hand shook as I reached for it, but before I could give it, his friend kicked the box, sending the watch clattering across the floor. The glass cracked with a sharp pop, the sound like my husband's heart monitor flatlining all those years ago. I gasped, bending down, but the crowd just roared louder. ATM with legs one shouted, housemaid another jeered. They weren't wrong in their eyes. I had been both provider and servant, sacrificing every dollar and every ounce of energy to keep Darius afloat while he drifted through life, jobless, entitled, and careless. My humiliation was complete. My son leaned forward, face inches from mine, his breath thick with whiskey, his eyes cold. "You heard me. Best gift you could ever give me is to vanish, to disappear. Go on, Mom. Do us all a favor." My vision blurred with tears I refused to let fall. I wanted to scream, to remind him of the nights I walked to the hospital in the rain just to cover extra shifts, of the times I went hungry so he could eat, of the mortgage payments I made alone when his father passed, of every ounce of love poured into him when I had nothing left for myself. But my voice was trapped somewhere deep in my chest, strangled by disbelief. They laughed again, and someone turned the music louder, as if to drown out the weight of his cruelty. My legs moved on their own, carrying me to the front door. I didn't slam it, didn't curse, didn't plead. I stepped into the humid Georgia night, the air thick with the scent of magnolias and cigarette smoke. My hands shook, frosting still sticky against my skin, my heart hammering so hard I thought it might burst. Behind me, the house vibrated with bass and laughter, my son's voice raised above it all, commanding the room like a king who had just slain his weakest subject. I stood in the porch, breath catching in my throat, and for a fleeting second, I wondered if disappearing might indeed be the only thing left for me to do. The street was quiet shadows, stretching long under the flickering streetlight. That was when I saw it, the slow crawl of headlights, turning the corner, blue and red, flashes strobing against the dark. Police. At first, I thought they were just passing through, maybe headed somewhere else. But when they slowed near my house, when the colors reflected off the window panes I had scrubbed clean only yesterday, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't fear. It wasn't shame. It was something sharp, electric, undeniable. The night wasn't over, and neither was I. My son's birthday wish had been for me to disappear. But in that moment, as the sirens painted my street in fractured light, I realized I had the power to give him exactly what he asked for and more. The police car rolled slowly down the street, and for a long moment, I just stood there on the porch, watching the lights fade as it passed by, my chest still tight from what my son had said. I wasn't ready to call anyone yet. I wasn't ready to face the humiliation inside either. I sat down on the porch swing, the same swing where I had once rocked Darius to sleep when he was a baby, singing lullabies my grandmother taught me. The wood creaked beneath me, and I closed my eyes, remembering a time when things weren't like this. Back then, my boy's laughter had been innocent, his arms small and warm around my neck, his smile, my only reward after long shifts at the hospital. Life hadn't been easy, but it was ours, and I carried us both through it. I thought about the years after his father passed. I was 36, a young widow left with a mortgage and a 10-year-old boy who cried himself to sleep for months. I worked double shifts as a nurse, sometimes leaving before dawn and coming home after midnight. My feet blistered, my back ached, but I told myself it was worth it if it meant Darius could have a chance at the life his father never got to finish. I scrimped and saved, cutting coupons, skipping meals, paying bills late just to cover his school trips, uniforms, and eventually college tuition. When Darius got into Georgia State, I cried tears of pride, convinced all my sacrifices had been leading to this. But within a year, he dropped out. He said college wasn't his thing. I tried not to let disappointment show, tried to be supportive, thinking maybe he'd find another path. Instead, he came back home, friends in tow, sleeping until noon, working odd jobs for a few weeks at a time, then quitting. Every time I pushed, he reminded me, "You're supposed to support me, Mom. That's what family does." And I did. I always did. Rent money, grocery bills, even covering his car insurance when he crashed his second-hand Honda into a light pole. The neighborhood saw it too. Mrs. Leah from across the street, a 72-year-old widow with sharp eyes and a sharper tongue, would lean over the fence and shake her head. "Child, you raise that boy too soft. You give, and he just takes. One day, he gon' break your heart." I used to laugh it off, even get a little defensive. "He'll find his way," I'd insist. "He's just struggling right now." But deep down, I feared she might be right. Over the years, my body bore the weight of the sacrifices. My knees stiffened from too many 12-hour shifts, my hands trembled after decades of handling patients, and my heart skipped beats when the stress became too much. Doctors warned me to slow down, but I couldn't. Darius depended on me. Without me, where would he go? Still, there were moments when I dared to dream he'd turn things around. Birthdays were one of them. Every year, I baked him a cake, no matter how broke or tired I was, hoping maybe this time he'd thank me. Maybe this time he'd show a flicker of gratitude. But instead, the parties got bigger, the friends rowdier, the respect smaller. This year was the worst yet. As I sat on that swing, I realized something every sacrifice I had made, every moment I had put his needs before mine, had only taught him that I would always be there to clean up his messes. My love had become his entitlement. My devotion had become his excuse. I thought about the last time I truly felt seen, not as a mother, not as a provider, but as Marcia. Maybe when my husband was alive, when he held my hand at church, when he told me I was strong, that I was enough. Since then, I had been invisible, existing only as the safety net beneath my son. And tonight, he had made it clear he didn't want the net anymore. He wanted me gone. The irony was bitter. I had given up my youth, my health, my savings, my joy for him, and his only wish on his birthday was my disappearance. For the first time in years, I wasn't just tired. I was hollow, sitting on that swing, staring at the cracked sidewalk, lit by the porch light. I realized I had been disappearing slowly for decades, until he finally said the words out loud. I could have stayed outside longer, let the warm night swallow me whole, but something in me needed to face what was happening inside. I pushed open the front door, the heavy bass rattling the glass panes as if mocking me. The moment I stepped back into my own living room, I realized I wasn't stepping into home. It felt like I was intruding into a stranger's club. Empty beer bottles littered the tables, smoke curled through the air, and a crowd of half-drunk 20 and 30-somethings filled every corner, none of them offering me so much as a glance of respect. Darius spotted me near the doorway, and emboldened by liquor and laughter, he pointed straight at me. "Look, y'all." She came back. "Couldn't stay away, huh, Mom?" The crowd turned in unison, their eyes sharp and glinting with amusement. One of his friends held up a phone, the red light blinking, recording me, broadcasting my humiliation for anyone to see. "Say something for the camera, Miss Robinson," a tall boy shouted, his grin wide. "Tell us what it feels like being an ATM with legs." The words sliced me open. Another girl leaned against the kitchen counter, sipping from a bottle, and chimed in, "Or maybe a maid. She's still folding your laundry." "Darius." The laughter exploded cruel and wild, like a pack of hyenas circling their prey. My hands trembled so badly, I pressed them together to keep them still. I glanced at the birthday cake candles, still flickering wax, dripping onto the frosting I had smoothed, with care, only hours earlier. It sat untouched, forgotten while the room filled with jeers. I reached for the gift box beside it, the restored watch I had saved from my husband's belongings. My plan had been to pass it to Darius, quietly, a reminder of his father's steady hand and his family's roots. But before I could lift it, one of his friends, grinning like the devil himself, nudged it off the table with his shoe. The box hit the floor, and the glass cover of the watch cracked with a sharp pop. The sound froze me in place. It was the same sound I had heard in the hospital when my husband's heart monitor flatlined, the sound of something final, something lost forever. I gasped, bending down to retrieve it, but Darius's voice cut through the air. "Leave it, Mom. It's just junk, like everything else you keep dragging around." He said it casually, as if discarding decades of sacrifice, as if the last piece of his father's memory meant nothing. My knees nearly buckled. I clutched the broken watch against my chest, fighting the tears burning at the corners of my eyes. The cameras caught every second. I could see the screen of the phone aimed at me, my face magnified, twisted, with hurt, displayed like entertainment. "Smile, Mom," another voice shouted. "Come on, don't cry, it's his birthday. Give us a show." The room erupted again, whistles and laughter ricocheting off the walls. My humiliation wasn't private anymore. It was public, digital, a spectacle. They would replay it, share it, laugh about it for weeks. I forced myself upright, clutching the cracked watch in one hand, the knife for the cake in the other. My voice trembled, but I found it low and raw. "This is my house," I said. But my words only fueled them. Darius smirked, arms outstretched, as if conducting an orchestra. "Not for long, Mom. It'll be mine when you're gone. Everybody knows it." His friends cheered, raising their cups, chanting his name like he was a king. And me, I was the old queen, cast aside, left, to watch her own crown crumble. I stood there, surrounded, stripped of dignity, in the one place that had once been my sanctuary. For decades, I had kept this house alive, scrubbing its floors, paying its bills, repairing its roof after storms. And in one night, my son turned it into an arena for my destruction. The humiliation washed over me in waves heavier than any exhaustion I had ever known. It wasn't just disrespect anymore. It was annihilation. And in that instant, with their laughter pounding in my ears, I understood something sharp and final. If I didn't act, if I didn't reclaim myself, I would vanish exactly as my son wished, not by choice, but by slow erasure. I stood in the living room, clutching the cracked watch to my chest, as the laughter faded into a dull roar in my head, and all I could see were memories, moments that played like old film reels, flickering in the corners of my mind. My knees weakened, and I leaned against the wall, letting the noise of the party blur into the background as my life with Darius unspooled before me. I saw him at 10 years old, skinny knees, poking out of ripped jeans, standing in the middle of a shoe store. His eyes had locked on a pair of gleaming basketball shoes, the ones all the other boys wore at school. I didn't have enough money. Rent was late. My paycheck was already gone to cover electricity and groceries. But the look in his eyes, it was the same look his father used to give me when he dreamed big. I left the store in the pouring rain, walked 2 miles to the pawn shop, and sold my mother's wedding ring, the last piece of her I had. That night, when I placed those shoes in Darius's hands, he lit up like Christmas morning. "Thanks, Mom," he said, hugging me tight. I held on to that moment for years, believing it meant the sacrifices were worth it. Then another memory hit Darius at 18, standing behind bars at the county jail. He'd gotten into a fight at a club, swung first, left. Another boy bloodied. They wanted to charge him, but bail was $5,000, money I didn't have. I remember the humiliation of walking into my supervisor's office, begging for an advance on my paycheck. He refused. I left in tears, then sold the gold chain my husband had given me on our 10th anniversary. When I placed that bail money on the counter, Darius came out, scowling, muttering, "That wasn't even my fault." I told myself he was young, hot-headed, that he'd learn. But inside, I worried. The years kept stacking sacrifices higher than any debt collector could tally. When he turned 21, I gave him money for community college, another chance at education. He barely lasted 2 weeks. At 25, I pulled strings at the hospital, begged a colleague to take him on as an orderly. He didn't show up after the second shift. Too much work for too little pay. He shrugged, as if a paycheck were beneath him. I covered the embarrassment, made excuses to my colleague, burned another bridge for him. At 28, he crashed the used Honda I scraped together for him. The insurance premiums skyrocketed, and somehow I paid them, terrified he'd end up on the road without coverage. Every time he fell, I caught him thinking maybe this was the last time, maybe the next time he'd stand on his own. But what I didn't see then, what I couldn't admit, was that every sacrifice made him weaker, not stronger. My devotion had become his entitlement. My giving had become his expectation. Each time I stepped in, he stepped further back, until he no longer saw me as a mother, but as a resource, a never-ending stream he could drink from without gratitude. I remembered nights when I worked double shifts at the hospital, my legs so swollen I could barely climb the stairs to my bedroom. Still, I'd stop in his room first, tuck a blanket over him, kiss his forehead, whisper, "I love you." He never stirred, too lost in dreams I thought were safe. And then there was the day I broke my ankle, slipping on ice in the hospital parking lot. I came home in a cast, hobbling, pain radiating with every step. I asked Darius for help carrying groceries. He waved me off, said he was busy playing video games. I dragged those bags in alone, the straps cutting into my hands, tears streaming down my face as I limped across the kitchen. That was the first time I wondered if I had raised a stranger. Now, in the middle of this party, with jeers still echoing in my ears, the truth slammed into me. It wasn't just tonight's cruelty, it was decades of being unseen, unheard, unvalued. The humiliation of his words had unlocked a vault of memories, each one a receipt for sacrifices never acknowledged. I had built his life brick by brick, and he had used those bricks to build a throne from which to mock me. I stared at him across the room, his arm draped lazily over the shoulder of a friend, laughter spilling from his lips, as though my pain were nothing but a sideshow. I saw not a boy I raised, but a man shaped by my mistakes, hardened by entitlement. I had unknowingly fed him. And for the first time in my life, I asked myself a question that nearly stopped my breath. What if the best gift I could give him wasn't another sacrifice, another bailout, another chance, but the absence he so cruelly demanded? The thought settled in my chest like ice. For 66 years, I had lived for others, my patients, my husband, my son. But in that moment, as I clutched the broken watch and listened to my son laugh at my expense, I wondered what it would mean to finally live for myself. The watch felt heavy in my hand, heavier than it had ever been, as if the shattered glass carried the weight of my entire marriage, my widowhood, and every sacrifice I had made since. I straightened my spine and stepped forward, my voice cutting through the haze of smoke and laughter. "Darius, we need to talk. Now. Outside." For a moment, the room quieted, his friends exchanging glances. Maybe they expected him to get up. Maybe they thought there would be some kind of truce. But Darius leaned back against the couch legs, spread wide, his grin stretching cruel across his face. "This is my party, Mom. If you got something to say it here. Everyone's listening." The crowd erupted into whistles and cheers, egging him on. My stomach tightened, but I held my ground. "I'm not asking, Darius. I'm telling you. We need to speak privately." He laughed, the sound jagged and mean. "Privately? No, no, no. You don't run things anymore. I'm 34 years old. You can't boss me around like I'm some kid. I took a step closer, meeting his eyes. This is my house. You're under my roof. That means my rules. The words hung in the air, and for a fleeting second, silence returned. But then he leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and spoke in a low voice that carried across the room. Not for long, Mom. Everybody knows it. This place will be mine when you're gone. Isn't that right? The crowd howled with laughter, some slapping his back, others raising their cups. Tell her, Darius, someone shouted. Claim your inheritance early, another chimed in. Humiliation scorched my face. I had endured his entitlement, his failures, his laziness. But never had he been so bold, so open in declaring my worthlessness. My blood pulsed in my ears, the thrum of betrayal, louder than the music, pounding against the walls. I lifted the broken watch high, the fractured glass catching the light, and for the first time, my voice did not tremble. This was your father's. He worked his whole life to give you something better, and you treat it and me like trash. You think this house is yours. You think my life is yours to claim. Let me tell you something. Darius, you don't own me. Not my life, not my home, not my soul. Gasps rippled through the room, but Darius only smirked, standing slowly to his full height. He was taller than me, broader, and for a heartbeat, his shadow seemed to cover me. You done, old woman? He asked, his words dripping contempt. Because nobody here cares. They're with me, not you. His friends cheered again, a drunken chorus behind their chosen king. And in that instant, I realized the truth. This wasn't just defiance. This was domination. My son wasn't trying to argue. He was trying to erase me right there in front of witnesses. The knife from the cake was still in my hand, its edge dull but pointed, and the weight of it reminded me I wasn't powerless. I slammed it down into the table with a thud that silenced the room. Frosting splattered drinks toppled, and every pair of eyes turned toward me. Enough, I shouted, my voice ringing with decades of swallowed pain. This party is over. Do you hear me? Over. The silence stretched for 3 long seconds. Then, one by one, his friends began to laugh again, softer this time, uneasy. But Darius didn't laugh. He glared at me, his eyes cold, lips curling into a sneer. You think you can stop me? You're nothing but a burden. You always have been. The words hit harder than any slap could. I felt my body shake, not from fear, but from clarity. This was no longer about a birthday party or a broken watch. This was about survival, about reclaiming the respect, the dignity, the life that had been stripped from me piece by piece. And as the tension crackled in the room, like static before a storm, I knew one thing for certain: I was done being erased. I left the living room without another word, my hands trembling, not from weakness, but from a storm rising inside me. Upstairs, the walls of my bedroom muffled the laughter, and music still rattling below. I closed the door, leaned against it, and let out a breath so long it felt like I was releasing 20 years of exhaustion. My eyes darted to the nightstand, where I kept my old leather-bound notebook, the one I'd filled with bills, receipts, and reminders. I pulled it out, sat on the bed, and flipped it open. The pages smelled faintly of ink and time, and as I scanned the numbers, the truth stared back at me, clearer than ever. Every month was the same cycle. $1,200 for groceries, and half of that went straight into Darius's bottomless stomach and his friends' late-night visits. 300 for utilities lights left on all night while video games hummed through dawn. 1,500 for the mortgage, a debt I had carried alone since his father's death, now nearly paid off the home, almost mine, free and clear. Add another 100 for his phone bill, 300 for his car insurance, and the random cash I slipped into his pocket when he swore he'd pay me back. I traced each number with my finger, the ink smudged from nights I cried over these same calculations. My sacrifices had turned into chains. The worst part, he never even asked anymore. He just took as if it were his birthright. I could still hear his words echoing in my mind. This house will be mine when you're gone. My chest tightened, and then suddenly it loosened, because I realized something he was wrong. He thought he owned me. He thought he owned this house. But the deed, the mortgage, the blood and sweat poured into every brick, those belonged to me, and only best. I opened the drawer of my nightstand and pulled out the folder I'd kept tucked away for years. Inside were copies of the deed insurance papers and my will. I flipped through them slowly, each page whispering possibility. Darius believed I would never stand up to him. He believed I was too tired, too old, too broken. But he had no idea the strength a mother could summon once her love had been turned into a weapon against her. I sat at the desk and wrote down a plan. Step 1, stop the bleeding. No more money for him. No more bailouts. No more excuses. Step 2, protect the house. If Darius wanted it so badly, then I would make sure he never got it. Selling it would be painful, but nothing compared to watching him rot its walls with disrespect. Step 3, call someone I could trust. Denise Carter, my old colleague from the hospital who had left nursing for law. She'd always told me, Marcia, if you ever need legal help, you call me. I had never picked up that card until tonight. My pen scratched across the paper as I listed out what I needed to do. Contact Denise first thing in the morning. Find a realtor stage. The house prepare for a quick sale. I'd kept this home alive on my back for decades, and now it would be the key to setting myself free. The laughter downstairs swelled again, but this time it didn't pierce me. It fueled me. Every jeer, every cruel word, every time my son had spat entitlement in my face, they were bricks in the foundation of a new life, one built not on sacrifice, but on justice. I ran my hand over the cracked watch, still lying on the desk. My husband had worn it every day, until the day he died. Maybe this was his way of reminding me I had the strength to fight, that disappearing wasn't the answer, but redefining myself was. For 66 years, I had lived in service. Tonight, I chose to live in strategy. I stayed upstairs longer than I should have, staring at the watch, the notebook, and the plan scribbled in my uneven handwriting. The laughter below turned into shouting glasses, breaking music, vibrating through the floorboards. My sanctuary was no longer mine. And in that moment, it struck me with startling clarity. If I couldn't reclaim my dignity through love, I would reclaim it through law. I picked up the phone and dialed 911. My voice didn't shake when the operator answered. This is Marcia Robinson. I need officers at 432 Maple Lane. There's a disturbance in my home, trespassers who refuse to leave. The operator asked if I felt safe. I looked at the door as another crash echoed from below glass, shattering like ice in a blender. Not anymore, I replied. Within 15 minutes, the blue and red glow I had glimpsed earlier returned this time, stopping in front of my house. 2 squad cars, doors opening, officers stepping out. Their radios crackled as they adjusted their belts and strode toward my porch. I followed them down the stairs, my heart pounding, not from fear, but from resolve. The music was so loud, the officers had to knock 3 times before anyone noticed. When they finally stepped inside, the room fell into stunned silence. Darius stumbled forward, his words slurred with drink. "What's this?" "My birthday surprise," he sneered. "Sir," one officer said, voice firm, "we've had a report of a disturbance. This is your residence." Before Darius could answer, I stepped forward, my voice clear. "No, this is my residence. I am the homeowner, and I want them out." Darius spun toward me, his face flushing red. "Mom, what the hell are you doing? You can't just—" "Yes, I can." I cut in, my voice slicing through the tension. "I've asked you and your friends to leave. You refused. This is trespassing. Officer, I want them removed." Gasps rippled through the room. Some of his friends muttered nervously, gathering their things, but a few lingered emboldened by Darius's glare. One officer turned to me. "Ma'am, to confirm you are the owner of this property." I pulled the folded copy of the deed from my notebook hands, steady, as I handed it over. "Yes, my name is on every paper, not his." The officer glanced at it, nodded, then turned to Darius. "You and your guests need to leave immediately. Failure to comply will result in arrest." Darius's eyes widened disbelief, written all over his face. "Arrest for being in my own house. Your mother is the homeowner," the officer said calmly. "Right now, you're a guest refusing to leave. That makes you trespassing. Do you understand?" The room buzzed with murmurs. His friends shifted uncomfortably. A girl grabbed her purse and bolted. Darius clenched his fists, his chest heaving. "You're doing this on my birthday. Really, Mom? You'd rather side with strangers than your own son." I stepped closer, lowering my voice so only he and the officers could hear. "You wished I would disappear, Darius. Tonight, I'm granting your wish. But you're leaving first." The officer placed a hand on Darius's shoulder. "Sir, it's time to go." When Darius resisted shoving the officer's hand away, the second officer moved in. In seconds, they had his arms behind his back, the metallic snap of handcuffs silencing the entire room. His friends froze, stunned, as the officers began reading his rights. Darius twisted his head toward me, rage twisting his features. "You'll regret this, old woman. You think you won. You think you can erase me." His words echoed in my chest, sharp and venomous. But for once, I didn't crumble. I stood taller, my shoulders squared. "No, son," I said quietly, though the entire room heard me. "I'm erasing the version of you that thinks I'm nothing." The officers led him out the door, his shouts fading into the night. One by one, his friends trickled out, their bravado gone, leaving behind a living room littered with bottles, ashes, and silence. I closed the door behind the last of them and locked it. My house was quiet again, but not peaceful, not yet. That would come later, when justice had run its course. Tonight was just the beginning. For the first time in decades, I felt something stirring in my chest. Not fear, not despair, power. The law was not just for other people, it was for me too, and I was finally ready to use it. When the door shut behind the last officer, the house seemed to exhale with me. The silence pressed against my ears, heavy and strange, after hours of pounding music and cruel laughter. I stood in the middle of the living room, looking at the wreckage left behind, beer bottles, tipped on their sides, cigarette ashes, ground into my rug, frosting smeared across the table where the cake still sat, half-melted candles bent and broken. It didn't look like my home anymore. It looked like a battlefield after the enemy had retreated. I walked slowly through the room, picking up a cup here, a bottle there, my hands steady, though my body ached. Each piece of trash felt like a reminder, a receipt of the disrespect I had endured for too long. The broken watch lay on the table, its cracked glass catching the light from the porch. I touched it gently, then set it back down. Not everything could be fixed. For the first time in years, the house was quiet enough for me to hear my own breath. I sank into the armchair by the window, the same chair where I had rocked Darius as a baby, the same chair where I sat night after night waiting for him to come home safe. My bones were tired, my heart bruised, but beneath the fatigue was something new, a faint sense of relief. Through the window, I could see the red and blue lights fading as the police car carried my son away. I knew he would spend the night in holding, maybe longer, if charges stuck. A part of me wanted to feel guilty. A mother should ache when her child is locked in the back of a squad car. But tonight, guilt didn't come. Instead, I felt a sharp, hollow clarity. This wasn't punishment. This was consequence. I pressed my palms together, bowing my head, whispering words I hadn't said aloud in years. God, give me strength. Not for him, not anymore, but for me. The house smelled of smoke and spilled liquor, but underneath it, I caught the faint scent of magnolias drifting through the open window. It was the smell of Georgia nights, the smell of every summer I had survived, every storm I had endured. I let it fill my lungs. In that moment, sitting alone among the ruins of my son's celebration, I realized something I had never dared to admit. Survival wasn't enough anymore. Tonight, survival had to turn into action. I closed my eyes, the image of Darius's face twisted with anger, still sharp in my mind, but it no longer broke me. Tomorrow would come, and with it, the first steps of a new life. Morning light crept through the blinds, casting long bars of gold across the living room floor that still bore the stains of last night. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. Instead, I sat at the kitchen table with a cup of black coffee, my notebook open, the broken watch beside me. For the first time in years, I didn't wonder how to save Darius from himself. I wondered how to save me. At 8 sharp, I picked up the phone and dialed a number I hadn't used in years. Denise Carter's office came the brisk voice on the other end. Denise had once been my colleague at the hospital, a brilliant nurse with a sharper tongue who later went back to law school in her 40s. Now, at 58, she was one of the toughest attorneys in Fulton County. "It's Marcia Robinson," I said, my voice steady, though my hands trembled. "I need legal advice. Urgent." Within hours, I was sitting in her office, papers spread across her mahogany desk, the deed to my home, my insurance documents, the mortgage statement showing just 3 payments left. Denise leaned back in her chair, glasses perched low on her nose, scanning every line. "Marcia," she said, finally, her voice clipped, but not unkind. "You've carried this house alone for decades. He has no legal claim to it. But if you're serious about protecting yourself, there's one way to guarantee he'll never get it. Sell it." The word hit me like a jolt. Sell it. The house where I had raised my son, buried my husband's memories, worked myself into the ground to keep standing. But as the thought settled, I realized it wasn't a loss. It was a release. "I want it gone," I said, surprising myself with the firmness of my voice. "I want him cut off. Completely." Denise gave a tight nod. "Then we move fast. I'll draft the paperwork today. You'll need a realtor you can trust." By that afternoon, I was sitting with Mr. Johnson, a seasoned realtor in his 60s, with silver hair and a calm demeanor. He walked through the house, taking notes, snapping photos of the rooms. "Market's good," he said, running a hand along the banister I had polished 100 times. "You've got equity here. We'll list it at 670. See where the offers land. Could close in 2 weeks if we move quick." 2 weeks, I repeated almost in disbelief. 2 weeks to untangle myself from a lifetime. The days that followed blurred into a montage of action sharper and clearer than any dream I had clung to before. Monday, Denise filed the paperwork, ensuring no one, not even Darius, could interfere with the sale. Tuesday, I boxed up photos, folded linens, scrubbed floors until they shone. Each drawer I emptied felt like shedding a layer of grief. Wednesday, Mr. Johnson staged the house, bringing in sleek furniture that made the space look like it belonged to someone else. In truth, it no longer belonged to me either. Thursday, professional photos were taken, the house captured in perfect light. I stood outside, watching my chest tight, knowing this would be the last time it was mine. Sunday, the open house. Cars lined the street. Strangers walking through the rooms where I had once read bedtime stories, cooked Sunday dinners, and nursed my broken ankle. They admired the hardwood floors, the garden I had tended in the back, the very things I had poured myself into. Offers came quickly, 6 in total, each one higher than the last. By Tuesday, an offer was accepted, $670,000 cash, with closing in 14 days. Denise called to tell me, her voice triumphant. "It's done. By the time he gets out of holding this house, we'll be in someone else's name." I sat at the kitchen table again, the acceptance letter in my hands, tears sliding silently down my face. Not of regret, but of release. For decades, this house had been my prison, as much as my home, binding me to a son who never valued it, never valued me. Now, it would be the key to my freedom. Still, the weight of finality pressed hard. I walked through the rooms one last time, touching the walls, the door frames, the windows. I had cleaned until my fingers cracked. In the bedroom, I lingered at the nightstand, where my husband's photo still sat. "I did my best," I whispered to him. "But our boy doesn't want saving. Not from me." That night, I lay in bed, listening to the quiet. No laughter, no shouting, no footsteps overhead. Just silence. And in that silence, I began to imagine a different life. Mornings without stress, evenings without chaos. A place where I wasn't erased, but seen. The sale wasn't just a transaction. It was justice. It was financial reckoning. It was proof that love without respect was not duty. It was enslavement. And I was done being enslaved. 14 days. That was all that stood between me and the life I had yet to claim. 14 days passed in a blur of boxes, signatures, and goodbyes. I whispered, only to myself. When I handed over the keys at closing, I felt the weight of decades slip from my shoulders. The house wasn't mine anymore, and that was the point. Freedom rarely looks like clinging, it looks like letting go. 2 days later, Denise called. "He's out," she said simply. I knew who she meant. Darius had been released. A chill ran through me, but not fear. Anticipation. That evening, I drove past Maple Lane one last time. The porch light glowed, but not for me. The yard was freshly trimmed by the new owners, a young couple I'd met at closing. Their children's toys were already scattered across the lawn. My heart clenched, then steadied. Life moved on. I parked a block away and sat in my car as dusk settled. I didn't plan to confront him, but part of me wanted to see the moment truth caught up with him. At 7 sharp, Darius appeared at the corner backpack, slung low, his stride a mix of swagger and exhaustion. He stopped at the foot of the driveway, pulling out his phone, no doubt ready to post his grand return. I could almost hear his voice rehearsing the story, how he'd been wronged, how his mother was cruel, how he was back to claim what was his. He strode up the steps, reached for the doorknob, and froze. His key didn't fit. He tried again, jiggling it, his brow furrowing. Then the door opened, not by his hand, but by the new owner, a man in his 30s, holding a toddler on his hip. "Can I help you?" the man asked politely, though his eyes narrowed at the sight of a stranger trying to force his way inside. Darius blinked confusion, flashing into anger. "What do you mean, help me? This is my house." The man's wife appeared behind him, crossing her arms. "No, it's ours. We closed last week." "Who are you?" Darius's voice rose, panic creeping in. "That's impossible. My mom, she lives here. This is our family home." The toddler squirmed in the man's arms, sensing the tension. He shifted the child higher and said firmly, "Ma'am, call the police." From where I sat in the car, I saw Darius's face crumble, disbelief twisting into rage. He banged on the doorframe, shouting words that blurred into the evening air. The neighbors peeked through curtains. A porch light across the street flicked on. And then the sirens came again. The same blue and red glow that had taken him away 2 weeks earlier returned, washing over the street. Officers stepped out, hands already raised in caution. "Sir, step away from the property." "This is my house," Darius shouted, his voice cracking. "She can't do this to me. She can't." But I knew better. She already had. I stayed in the shadows of my car, watching as the officers pulled him back down the steps, their voices calm but firm. He kept turning, scanning the street, as if he could conjure me out of the night, as if I'd appear to rescue him one more time. But I didn't move. For the first time in 34 years, I let my son face the truth without my interference. The officers spoke with the new owners, assuring them their rights were secure, then guided Darius toward the patrol car. His shoulders slumped, his fight draining, though his mouth never stopped moving. Accusations, pleas, curses. I gripped the steering wheel, my knuckles pale. Tears blurred my vision, not of regret, but of release. He wanted me gone. Tonight, he got his wish. As the patrol car pulled away, I started my engine, driving in the opposite direction. The road stretched ahead, open and unknown. Behind me, Maple Lane was no longer a chain around my neck. Ahead somewhere was a life I had yet to live. The twist wasn't that I lost my son. The twist was that I found myself. The morning after watching Darius led away again, I woke in a small rental apartment across town. The walls were bare, the furniture secondhand, but the air felt different, lighter. No ghosts lingered in the corners, no echoes of slammed doors or shouted insults. Just me, a kettle whistling on the stove, and a silence that finally felt like peace instead of punishment. Denise came by that afternoon with a thick folder in her hands. She laid it on my kitchen table, tapping her manicured nail against the cover. "Everything's official," she said. "The sale is complete. The proceeds are secured in your account, and more importantly, Darius has no legal avenue to touch a cent of it." I exhaled, shoulders sagging with relief. "And if he tries," Denise's mouth curved into the kind of smile only a lawyer can manage, equal parts satisfaction and warning. "Then he learns what a restraining order feels like. You're protected, Marcia. This is your fresh start." I opened the folder and scanned the documents, sale records, account statements, court filings, Denise had prepared to protect my estate. Each page was proof that I wasn't powerless anymore. I wasn't the woman begging her son to behave in her own home. I was the woman who chose boundaries, who enforced them with law, not apologies. That evening, I sat with my checkbook and notebook, making lists the way I always had. But for the first time, the numbers weren't about survival. They were about living. A new car to replace the rusted one, barely clinging to life. A contribution to my church, which had quietly held me in prayer, even when I felt invisible. A savings account marked only for me. I also wrote one final check, not to Darius, but to my attorney. Paid in full. I scribbled in the memo line. Justice has a cost, but freedom is priceless. The fallout came quickly. Darius called from a borrowed number. 2 nights later, his voice dripping with outrage. You ruined me, Mom. Do you hear me? You sold our house. You embarrassed me in front of everyone. How could you do this to your own son? For once, I didn't let him drag me into the pit of his anger. I listened until he ran out of breath, then said calmly, I didn't ruin you, Darius. I just stopped ruining myself for you. Then I hung up. He tried again, angry voicemails, texts filled with threats and guilt. But Denise had already prepared me. Do not engage, she'd said. Silence is stronger than any argument. So I blocked the numbers, turned my phone to Do Not Disturb, and carried on. The whispers from extended family trickled in too. A cousin left a message. You know, people are saying you've abandoned him, that you're cold. I almost laughed. Cold. After 34 years of burning myself to keep him warm, let them talk. They hadn't seen the bruises carved into my spirit by years of entitlement and disrespect. They hadn't sat in that courtroom where my lawyer filed papers, ensuring I'd never be responsible for his debts again. The law was on my side. For the first time, so was my own heart. Weeks passed, and I began to notice small transformations in myself. I joined a community garden project and dug my hands into soil that wasn't just mine, but shared where neighbors smiled and said my name with kindness. I enrolled in a painting class at the senior center, holding a brush like I was holding possibility itself. I even laughed, loud, unguarded, something I hadn't done in years. And then came the Sunday. I stood at the church podium, testifying, not about sorrow, but about strength. I told the congregation, sometimes love means letting go. Sometimes justice isn't about revenge, but about refusing to be erased. Faces nodded, hands clapped softly, and I felt a warmth bloom in my chest. As I stepped down, a woman I barely knew squeezed my hand and whispered, You gave me courage. That was the moment I understood the story wasn't just about losing a son. It was about reclaiming myself, and in doing so, becoming a light for others, stumbling through the same darkness. Legal justice had given me protection. Boundaries had given me dignity. But what saved me most was realizing that family isn't defined by blood alone. It's defined by respect, by love, that doesn't demand you disappear. I walked home that day beneath the Atlanta sun, the air fragrant with magnolias, my steps steady. Behind me lay a past I no longer owed. Ahead stretched a future I was finally free to claim. 3 months after the house on Maple Lane was sold, I stood on a different kind of porch, one that looked out over a small but sturdy cabin on the edge of the Chattahoochee River. The water glimmered under the late afternoon sun, cicadas buzzing in the trees, and for the first time in decades, I felt what freedom really meant. This cabin wasn't large, it wasn't flashy, but it was mine, paid for in cash. No mortgage, no threats of eviction, no footsteps overhead that weren't welcome. Just my space, my rules, my peace. Each morning, I rose with the sunrise, brewed coffee strong enough to fill the room with its rich scent, and sat at the wooden deck, watching the river curl and rush, as if it too had broken free from something. My body worn from years of nursing shifts and sleepless nights, worrying about Darius, began to heal in ways I hadn't expected. The tightness in my chest eased. My sleep stretched deeper. My smile, real unforced, returned. But the healing wasn't just physical. It was in the choices I made. I began attending weekly therapy sessions, finally speaking aloud the truths I had buried under duty. My therapist, a patient woman named Dr. Ellis, taught me that guilt doesn't have to be a lifelong companion, that boundaries are not cruelty, but care, that loving someone doesn't mean letting them destroy you. I also joined a support group at the community center called Quiet Strength. Each week, women and men sat in a circle of folding chairs, sharing stories that mirrored mine. Children who had drained them, dry siblings who had betrayed them, parents who had manipulated them. There was pain in every voice, but also power. We cried, we laughed, we reminded each other we weren't alone. I even spoke one evening, telling them about the birthday party, the broken watch, the police lights flashing across my lawn. When I finished, the room was silent, not with judgment, but with recognition. One woman reached over, squeezed my hand, and whispered, "You're living proof we can survive." Word spread. Soon, I was helping to organize meetings, connecting newcomers with resources, even starting a small fund from the sale of my house to help others break free from financial entanglements with abusive relatives. What had once been my shame became my strength. Darius, I heard bits and pieces. He drifted from couch to couch, called relatives for money, posted angry rants on social media about betrayal. At first, his words stung lines about me, being heartless about how I owed him for bringing him into this world. But slowly, the sting dulled. I didn't respond, didn't explain, didn't chase redemption in his eyes. I understood now his story was his own to carry, and mine no longer had to be weighed down by it. One quiet Saturday, I sat on my porch with a canvas propped against an easel, painting the river in shades of blue and gold. My phone buzzed with a message from the group. "Thank you, Marcia. Your strength saved me today." I set the phone down, tears filling my eyes, not of sadness, but of gratitude. My pain had become someone else's survival kit. My scars were no longer just reminders of what I endured. They were maps for others to find their way out. That evening, I lit a candle by the window and whispered a prayer. Not for Darius to change, though my heart would always hope, but for me to keep walking forward, to keep choosing peace over chaos, boundaries over guilt, truth over silence. As the flame flickered, I thought of all the women like me who had been told to endure, to sacrifice, to disappear for the sake of family. And I wanted them to hear this: you are not invisible. You do not owe your existence to someone else's comfort. You deserve to breathe, to rest, to thrive. The cicadas sang louder, the river shimmered brighter, and I felt the world wrap around me with a gentleness I had forgotten was possible. I wasn't just surviving anymore. I was living. And in living, I had found something stronger than revenge, stronger than regret, freedom. So if you're watching this wherever you are, let me leave you with this: sometimes the bravest thing you can do is walk away. Sometimes, the greatest love is the one you finally give to yourself. And if you've ever been told to disappear, remember this. You don't vanish by leaving. You shine